Excellent. So is it mine to run with, Ginger?
Just let me say a couple of things.
Sure.
Welcome and thank you all for joining. This is the first of a 4-week series on cybersecurity. We would like to thank Recorded Futures for sponsoring this series and also their representative, Bill Vollono, who's going to be presenting today. If you don't mind holding your questions till the end or putting them in the chat function, we are going to allow about 5 to 10 minutes at the end for any questions you might have. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Bill.
Great. Thanks, Ginger. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll jump right in. So I just wanted to introduce the series. So I know this is being recorded, so hopefully some audiences, some members that couldn't attend today will be able to look back at this and understand what the direction of the 4 weeks. Today, we're going to be covering cybersecurity essentials for small businesses, but you can see a theme here from 14th, the 21st, and the 28th, where we're going to grow the conversation and the education, and ideally leave you with a lot of takeaways for either yourself as an individual or your businesses. So my name is Bill Vollono, as Ginger pointed out. I'm from Recorded Future. And to give you a little background, I will tell you that I'm a sales engineer, and in that capacity, I sell a software that Recorded Future creates around threat intelligence. Recorded Future's been around since 2009. We're headquartered in Somerville, Massachusetts, with locations around the globe in the UK, Sweden, Singapore, Japan, Dubai. But what our solution does when I talk about intelligence is it's a software where it's a platform that individuals can log into. Companies purchase the product, and ideally it empowers security team members and security tools with intelligence to have context and insight into cyber threats and risks, ultimately driving outcomes of how to protect their people and their organization. So before we jump into the slides of what I'm covering today, I do want to thank the Beaufort County Economic Development Corporation, the Beaufort Digital Corridor, where I'm actually broadcasting from today, the City of Beaufort, and the South Coast Cyber Center. And on the last note there, for those that may or may not be aware, the South Coast Cyber Center had a great grant win recently, so please Google that and check it out. So the two main points, two realms we're going to cover for today's session is our understanding real-world implications of not taking cybersecurity seriously, and then foundational steps to secure your systems, your network, or your employees. As we talk through, I want you to think about this metaphor that is often used in cybersecurity. So you can think of whether it's your personal home network, your corporate network, whether you're a small, a mid-sized company, or a large company. Think of it as a castle, and there's layers of defense. There's the tall walls. There's the moat. There's some archery at the top of those walls, and that often is comparable to the approach for cybersecurity and how you protect your network or your people. You're going to see, I'm not going to detail this list that just populated on the right-hand side, but just so you have awareness, there's a lot of technologies and terms leveraged when it comes to cybersecurity. So I won't read through all of them, but a SIM, for example, is a security information event management tool. And that's where a company, whether you're a mid-size or large or even small, they might be leveraging some outside party that helps them with log aggregation, so data aggregation. If you have a security system at your company, or you have logins at the door, or software, every action you take from a computer perspective leaves data behind, and so you want that in a central place where you can understand it and make judgments or assessments about behavior from a technical perspective. But you can see there's a long list of technologies today, and for the next couple of weeks. The goal is not for us to say, you need to go buy these technologies or these tools, right? This is about awareness and education. So just wanted you to know there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle sometimes when it comes to cybersecurity. The bigger your network is, the bigger your business is, the more complex things become, and then you'll probably get into the realm of needing some of the tools listed on the right there. So I wanted to take the approach of let's think about the challenge or the problem, and then we'll talk about how that impacts what, not just the challenge, but the impact and repercussions of the challenge, and then potential solutions or approaches to try and tackle the challenge. So what do we have here on the screen? We've got a Walmart with lined with refrigeration units, like you'd see. I'm sorry, Walmart, Target, as you would see at any Target. And on the right-hand side, we've got the statistics there, 40 million credit cards and 70 million data files. If you aren't familiar, what happened in 2013, which was highly publicized, was a cyber attack, or we often called a breach. And you can think of a breach as a unauthorized access into your network. So Target had a breach in 2013 that resulted in the theft of 40 million credit cards, to include names, the actual card number, the security, the 3-digit security, likely could be, zip included. When you think about when you buy something online, you have to provide all these features. So how did we get from refrigeration units to all of this stolen data? So as a company, whether you're large like Target or mid-size or small, everybody's got a network. You've got your email, you've got different tools or systems on the network. I mentioned security cameras as an example. In this case, we're talking about a POS, a point of sale, or so when you swipe your credit card, you're literally swiping it through a POS system. Now, what happened here is this wasn't necessarily Target's doing, but the nature of their refrigeration system is such that it's pretty complicated. They need to maintain certain temperatures on products throughout the evening. And so they had outsourced this capability to their HVAC refrigeration vendor. So that means that that vendor had access to log into Target's network and system to continuously monitor the temperature in these refrigeration units. What happened was that threat actors or hackers, folks that are looking to take advantage of individuals or companies, they cast a very wide net. And in doing so, they have automated technology where they'll say, blast out an email to try and trick someone into providing their credentials. That happened with the HVAC company that handled Target's refrigeration needs. And once they were inside the network of the HVAC company, they were able to then find the credentials to get into the Target network. And once they did that, they were able to then pivot in to different areas of the network. So picture this virtual map in your head, and ultimately get to the POS systems and pull out all of this credit card data. The long story short here is this is more of a third-party supplier chain risk issue, but it always bubbles down to the main point of, am I secure? Is my network secure? Am I taking the proper steps? Because not only did this impact the mechanical services, the HVAC team based out of Pennsylvania here, but it had enormous impact on Target and Target's customers. I think Target settled a multi-state settlement around $18 to $19 million. And I don't think this necessarily means we're going to stop shopping at Target, but I think it's a good lesson learned, and from a bigger, larger story. This is not something that is unique to large enterprises, and we'll dig into that about how small and mid-sized companies are targeted as well. So is my organization big enough to be a legitimate target? What I'm showing on the screen, working left to right, are some local, this hits home local, right? This is a long list and I apologize, a lot of text on the screen, but what I'm showing you are actual breaches, and you can see somewhere some say unknown malware. What that means is we don't know which malware it is, or we don't know which ransomware it is. But to highlight the problem again, not just the Targets of the world, all of these organizations have had some sort of breach, some level of unauthorized network access. And beyond that, that network access, that unauthorized access then results in things like maybe your 911 operator telephone lines are compromised or shut down. And maybe there's certain things that are now disabled from a healthcare or a medical perspective. Very serious issues here. And this is not to say that South Carolina or the Beaufort area has a challenge, or anything like that. I'm picking on our local area to just make it more relevant. But the reality is this is going on in every state, and it's going on with every country in the world. So it's a real challenge to try and understand how we can protect a network. So what you see represented on the screen, public safety, local government, medical, educational, we might have some folks that have tuned in or that are going to listen to the recording later and say, well, I don't fall into those categories. Well, let's look at some other examples of targeted industries when we talk about small and mid-sized companies. On the left, I have compiled a list from the Verizon 2020 data breach investigation about the types of industries across industry company size that are targeted. So it's not just local, state, educational. It really runs the gamut across areas. And I've got the call out on the screen there. We have a mid-size to large tech company based out of Charleston that just recently was having to pay to get out of a ransomware situation. There are also several other well-known incidents that have played out in the southeast part of the country that I could mention, but probably aren't worth it because it's not really a low country or a southeastern problem. It's a North American global problem. The one stat I want to call out here on the screen is 28% of data breaches impact small businesses, and phishing attacks account for over 30% of those breaches. So what is phishing? Let's talk about what phishing means. Well, before we get there, one last slide to make the repercussions and hopefully not to scare folks, but to make it real. What happens if you do suffer a breach or a phishing where there's unauthorized access and certain parts of your network are shut down? It could mean that individuals can't purchase your product at a portal where maybe it's retail, maybe it's products that you're selling online. Now you can no longer sell those because there's a halt on the network. Or in the case we see on the screen here, maybe it's payment card information of your customers was stolen. It could be private customer data. And what type of impact does that have? Well, there's always going to be an audit. There's likely going to be a fine. When we talk about retail or smaller companies that maybe are thinking about those POS systems where there's a swipe of a credit card happening, there's going to need to be PCI compliant. So that's payment card industry. And we have to think about the repercussions of the data that we collect from others. And when we ask ourselves, am I an attractive target? Am I worth being targeted? Threat actors are not, they're not judging company size. They're casting that wide net in automated fashion to ideally get someone on the hook, and that is someone or some company. So these are just a couple of examples across different industries where small companies were impacted. This is coming from both a small data breach insurance carrier and a report published by the state of California. And at the top, you can see the average cost of a data breach for a small business between $36,000 and $50,000. But the reality is, if it's $36,000 to $50,000, can a small company even handle that? I'm not putting it on the screen because, again, my point isn't necessarily to scare here, but it could put a company out of business. So one last point, I think I kind of already mentioned the statistic around phishing. What do they look phishing for? Credentials, personal data, medical information, because ultimately credentials just continue to lead you to more access to more sensitive data. And what can happen is when someone gets credentials, maybe they get your credentials and it's not necessarily because they want to access your network illegally or inappropriately, but then they'll go sell those credentials to someone that does want to access the network. So before we talk about some kind of a more broader, bigger picture perspective of ideas or ways to think about approaching solutions, I just wanted to throw on the screen, just really quickly, some sample phishing emails. So on the left, what we have is a fake PayPal email. On the right, this is just an example of a Gmail, an email from Gmail that's a scam. And one of the things that you'll hear me say on the next slide, it's really about education. So on the left, what they're displaying, it's hard to see in the fine print there, but the sender, if you look at the email service.e paypal@outlook.com, right? The email looks legitimate. It's got the logo, it's got the text, it fits the format. But the sender, that doesn't make much sense. Is PayPal going to come from an email address that says service.e.paypal? You know, it's very suspicious. They certainly wouldn't send it from Outlook. They'd send it from paypal.com. So that's just one angle of thinking about, you know, an easy step to analyze, am I being targeted? Is there something not right about this email? On the right-hand side, with the Gmail example, what we have is you can see this ellipsis symbol, the red arrow in the top right corner. And then you scroll down to the show original section. Now, what that does is, so the email is presented to me as from Josh Kirschner. If I select show original, it opens up a more detailed view of, don't just show me the name of the sender, but show me the actual email address, because I want to, once again, verify, is this someone coming from where they claim to be? And most companies, most banks, you know, PayPal, whether it's you know, your local banking, your larger banking that might be a bigger in the country, they're not going to necessarily send you something that would say, provide me your details, or you know, the CFO needs this this routing number right away. There's things that are clearly you should kind of just pay attention to that may not seem right, and usually that's when you want to take it a layer deeper and say, well, let me look at this email address from the sender, or let me open up this original view to see the more of the context around what's being sent to me. So this is my last slide. So let's take a couple minutes here. I apologize, there's a lot of text here on the screen, but let's start from the top. So education. What can small and mid-sized companies do to proactively put things in place? Education. So a lot of the compromise is coming from human error. That's you can't, I guess, downplay that enough. And what is the human error? So we just walked through an example of an email where it's just really easy. You're going through your inbox and you're clicking, and you're not even really reading, but now you've potentially opened up an avenue of someone to target your organization or your network. So education, now there's multiple types of companies that can offer like phishing email education. And what that would be, they'll provide you a login portal to have your employees understand and walk through examples similar to what I just did on the last screen, but much more detailed, call out pointers of things to look for. They provide latest up-to-date trends around phishing emails, and that can be a very inexpensive, great first approach to educating your staff. So that would be, again, there'd be companies that can provide that type of phishing training. Password management. So we always want to have two-factor authentication. So not just a credential, but also, you know, we've got our iPhones where we can say, it's also going to provide me another form of way of proving who I am. You'll see it often today with banking, if you're banking on applications on your phone today. And I would admit that two-factor authentication can be a little bit tedious and sometimes annoying, but it's the little things that are important when it comes to cybersecurity protocols, and just making sure that you're following the hygiene. So that next bullet about cybersecurity guidelines and protocols. So I imagine, you know, we all are in the world of COVID, and we're moving to a more digital life as we've seen the trend over the last 20 years, but COVID certainly amplified or increased that. Some of the speakers that are going to come in the future weeks are likely going to talk about that transition to remote work, the concept of virtual private networks, VPNs, how to be safe with interacting with a network or your platforms, your solutions that might be online. And I just wanted to call out. So we've got Shopify, Amazon, AWS listed there, Microsoft Azure. So those are the cloud versions of what we used to call on-prem. We now call in the cloud, right? You've got your Apple photo storage in the cloud. The reality is that is just a data center somewhere, but it's being managed by Amazon and Microsoft, and allows you to be more flexible in this kind of more digital world we live in. And the call out here around this, what SOC, so SOC, that's a type of report. PCI, I mentioned the PCI earlier. Payment card industry has standards and security protocols. These types of solutions, Shopify, Amazon, Microsoft, they have security standards, they have security procedures. It's worth understanding whether you're going to go with something like one of these three examples, or you're going a different route, to understand what they do from a cybersecurity perspective. That doesn't mean you need to be an expert in cybersecurity. It's simply just having an awareness of what standards and protocols are the companies leveraging that for which I'm using them, to prop up my business. If I'm going to open up a new retail business and I'm going to use Shopify, or I want to use the G Suite offering, I want to know, well, to what extent are they going to protect my employees, my company, and the network that I'm choosing to operate out of. So that kind of gets to the next point. Who owns cybersecurity? This is a tough question. So I talk to a lot of enterprise customers, very large customers or companies across the country. And that's not an easy question to answer. So I can only imagine it gets a little bit more complicated when we get down to the mid or small size companies. And so who owns cybersecurity? Is it the CEO of the company? Do you have an IT admin? Do you have someone on your team that just happens to be fluent with a lot of technologies? They understand how email operates, they understand phone apps. My point here is, what you would really want to do, whether you're considering creating a company or you have your own company, is evaluating a plan. And it can start small. So I've got listed here incident response plan. Maybe that's a little bit too far out. Maybe it's something you grow into, but you should have an understanding of the emails. So they're in bold. We're going to use G Suite, and here's why. We're not just going to sign up for our own one-off Gmail account. The G Suite is an affordable first step approach to having all my employees. That could be 5 employees, it could be 200 employees, that can leverage a very controlled environment for email or documents like Excel or CSV or spreadsheets. It's all siloed in one place, and we know that G Suite, because they have certain security standards, they're taking the right steps to make sure my team and my company are secure. So when I say here, evaluate solutions and offerings, for example, MSSP. So an MSSP is a managed security provider. That's another great first step to think about when you are kind of taking the cybersecurity step forward. What MSSPs do is they assess and take a very programmatic approach of solving security needs, considering concerns like business strategy, planning, monitoring and operations, defenses and controls, and they even do training as well. So there's a lot of training options, whether you want a company to help manage your data processing or your network, or you want to go ahead and say, I just want to do a one-off training for phishing emails, as I mentioned earlier. But the one thing, always keep in mind, factor it into budget. I talk to a lot of customers, small, medium, and large, and that's a part of the planning process. You think, well, I've got so many initiatives, we're trying to stand up a new product or going a different direction with our branding, and that takes a lot of finance, right? But as we highlighted on a previous slide here, the impact of doing nothing can be greater than having to factor in a piece of cybersecurity puzzle into your budget. The last thing I'll mention before we'll stop, because I know we're coming up on the 30-minute session here, is the POS. I've mentioned a couple times the point of sale. And the reason I wanted to include this into today's presentation is because when we talk about small, medium businesses, the goal is to accept payment methods and to grow a business. And that's a very quick, easy way for companies to do that, right? Like I said, a swipe of a card, they're at a counter, they swipe the card, they're online, they punch in their credit card information. When we talk about POS, password hygiene, what I'm talking about is, having unique, challenging passwords. Not all tools will ask you for a very complex password, but think about your own router at home. When you bring home your router and you plug it into the wall and you set up your Wi-Fi, it's going to ask you to log in with the predefined password that's on the bottom of your router. But that came from the factory. There are times where threat actors will target factory-based technologies to get those default passwords. So the same thing goes here with a POS system. You want to not just stick with the default factory settings. Antivirus. That's been around for years, for decades, and there's no reason it shouldn't be an important part of what you're doing today. Especially there's antivirus dedicated for POS systems. And then restrict internet access. This can be for POS. Maybe you don't want, you want to silo, which means you're kind of controlling what the POS system has access to and what type of data flow happens. But I would also say restrict internet access can apply to your employee base. I think we're going to get into, like I mentioned, some conversations in future sessions in the next couple of weeks around employees that are now have to work from home because of COVID, or maybe they were always working from home. But you want to think about what an employee may be accessing from in an innocent way across their phone or their own computer or corporate computer when they're on the network. And what type of doors does that open up? Adware, which doesn't sound malicious, but can also be hampering to networks and to business in general. So it's a lot of talking, and I went through some of those slides pretty fast. I'll leave just a minute here. I think we've got left about 3 minutes, so I'll pause and see if we have any questions. Stop sharing my screen.
Bill, yes, we do have a few questions. The first one we have is, can you go a bit into the Microsoft 360 hack happening right now? I think it'd be good to hear your perspective and how it applies.
Yes, so that is related to server exchanges, and that what's important there is that you think about, there's another big breach around SolarWinds. These are products that a lot of companies use, right? Microsoft 360 is huge, and everybody uses it. I mean, I have Microsoft Home Edition. When we're talking about Exchange servers, that's going to be like for businesses. And I think this actually kind of gets back to the supply chain threat and concerns. So now we're getting into a little bit more down into the weeds around vulnerabilities and patching. So a lot of companies today, they'll use vulnerability scanners to scan their network. Let's take a popular tool called Tenable. So there's a Nessus scanner where you as a user can drive and point your own scan on your own network to see what type of vulnerabilities you have. And what's important about the Microsoft 360 example is understanding the vulnerabilities tied to that type of threat or attack, and then making sure that your IT system, or if you have a dedicated patching team, is patching those vulnerabilities as soon as possible. And part of the recorded future angle is what's going on with Microsoft 360 is having the visibility outside of your network and understanding the implication of how it could impact your network. And if you have that type of server or that type of product, you want to be able to be patching it timely, because again, those threat actors are automated and casting that net continuously. So I see a couple other questions, and I know we're short on time. So if Ginger, I'll run through them really quickly.
Okay.
What should companies look at? Should they look at liability insurance to review coverage for ID theft or ransomware coverage? 100%, yes. Ransomware, as you saw on the slide, locally and globally is a challenge, and cybersecurity insurance is a wise thing to think about these days. How can a small company with little to no security solve this and not become a repeat victim? So this is, to me, is a tough one. I think the MSSP route makes a lot of sense. If you're a small company and you're trying to scale up your cybersecurity capabilities, that can be an initial step. But sometimes it's about educating your leadership and understanding the threats that face organizations to help, again, factor it into budget about why we need to purchase certain things, products or services. So sometimes it's a little bit of the chicken and the egg challenge where, yeah, maybe we don't want to wait for a breach to have the value statement of why we need to purchase something. And the last thing, would you recommend password manager like LastPass? Yeah, LastPass is good. There's a number of them. There's 3 or 4 big ones out there. But I would always say, make sure you have 2-factor authentication, and LastPass incorporates that. And LastPass also has really great, strong password protection requirements. So I know we're a minute over, Ginger. I don't know if we need to wrap up here, but.
I see no additional questions. I think we're good. I'd just like to remind everyone that next week's session will be guarding against today's cyber threats, and our presenter will be Delano Collins from Corsica Technologies.
Great,
Thank
thanks
you,
so
Bill.
much for having me.
Oh, it was great. Thank you so much. And thank you all for attending, and we hope to see you again next week. Have a great rest of the day.